tears aren't coming. The tears just aren't coming.
Okay. Just to be clear, it looks like he's dead or he is dead?
It just looks like he's dead. He's got, like, blue paint on him or something. But he's going to be fine.
What is wrong with you?
Doctor!
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes. One of the things that you'll hear within the comic fandom is there are certain comics made today that are actually not made to sell. I've actually got that feeling myself with a couple of series. It's like they wanted to put this out there, but I think they knew that with the intention of it wasn't going to sell, just being a DC and Marvel comic. And somebody came out with an older claim about that, Kurt Busiek. You probably heard of him. And I wanted to bring in my good friend Joe Corallo, comic book insider, professional writer, award-winning editor, to see if this is something that he's heard about in the past. How you doing, Joe?
I'm all right, Wes. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm certain that you've heard this claim out there where people are like, well, that comic wasn't even created to sell.
Sure.
What do you think about just those claims in general? Because this is pretty specific.
Yeah, I think specifically with Kurt's here, I'm not sure he's specifically saying that they were going out of their way for that, but that by making those declarations that Wonder Woman couldn't be in the front of the title and promoting George Perez, that it ended up that way. But he was put restrictions on how he could promote and market the book and what they were going to put behind it. Here's I got some of the details. This is 1986. It's like 4-part miniseries called The Legend of Wonder Woman. Mm-hmm. And it adopted the aesthetic of the Wonder Woman from the Golden Ages. It kind of tell untold stories of Diana Prince in her earlier days. And according to Kurt, because they were rebooting the character with George Perez, which turned out to be very successful. It's, I think, generally considered to be the best Wonder Woman of all times, at least that run. Mm-hmm. They didn't want to fatigue readers and retailers by drawing attention to what Busiek was doing, and they put all these conditions on it. He couldn't put Wonder Woman at the beginning of the title. He said the name Wonder Woman, the Amazon sensation was turned down. The legendary Wonder Woman was turned down. The sensational Wonder Woman was turned down, and even Sensation Comics. The last one, because they specifically, in his mind, I believe, they had to put this out because they didn't know if the George Perez reboot would hit market in time for them to meet the legal obligations from the Marston estate to continue to keep the Wonder Woman license so they could continue to make Wonder Woman comics as the exclusive kind of thing. I imagine this would be very frustrating. Oh yeah, no, for sure. So it's engineered to fail in a way. I don't think that was the intention to pump money into a project that was not going to sell. But when you lay it out like that, it's impossible. Because, the way it's described, it's basically saying, we can't undercut the George Perez stuff, but we need something out just in case. And so it becomes this sort of impossible task. And Kurt went on to say that even though he was told specifically this would not reflect poorly on him, it seemed to, according to Kurt, we don't know from editors or whatever to say otherwise, but that the sales on that hurt Kurt and potentially Trina as well at the big two, although I don't think Trina necessarily cared. She's an underground indie comics person, and this was her, I believe, first foray into Wonder Woman, and she was the first woman to draw Wonder Woman comics. And so I believe that all happened here, but they didn't play that up. Now, I think it would be very different if that was something that came out more recently.
Well, certainly, we've got Sensational Wonder Woman, we got Wonder Woman, we got Wonder Girl, and we got Wonder Woman Black and Gold. Those are the 4 that I can think of. They're all being led by Wonder Woman in the exact same moment. Mm-hmm. It's a different market today. And you can see by the constraints that he was put under, we don't want to overshadow this big project that we got coming up. And it turned out they were kind of correct. That was the big one. That was the ongoing, and it turned out to be a real winner for them.
Yep.
And we don't want to, highlight Wonder Woman as a featured character, but it has to be in the title, but it can't be too cool kind of thing. Would be very frustrating. And as Kurt said, they said this won't reflect poorly on you, but he doesn't regret it because he said he needed the money at the time. Do you see that happen to a lot of creators where maybe the circumstances aren't the best at the moment, but the situation dictates that you got to take a paying job's a paying job, and you just kind of got to do the best you can with what you have?
Yeah, I think what you see today now, you saw this a bit more a few years ago. It still happens, but it happens less often because I think they just cancel books quicker, or they'll just reset to number one faster. But a few years ago, what you would see is runs when they were just wrapping up. They'd hire a new writer, maybe new artist, and wrap up a run. So it's already canceled. They're not marketing it, but they need to wrap up those last 4-6 issues. And you would see people who would take those jobs, and you don't know for a fact, but it feels like, oh, these are people they just bring in to like end runs, and then they get a certain reputation that they can't sell books, even though they're intentionally being hired and placed on books that are canceled or that they've pulled marketing from and just need someone to wrap it up.
Yeah, I've got a couple of names that come to mind, and I'm not trying to speak poorly on the quality of the writing, but it felt like they've been pigeonholed or put in these difficult situations. I think Fred Van Lent felt like he was the guy that you would bring in, maybe if the character was stale, and see how much longer it could go. And maybe today, maybe a Jim Zub seems like he's been put in a couple of situations where it's like, what is he supposed to do here? It would have been better to just reboot it rather than, taking up, an issue 13 of a run that hasn't been very successful at that point.
Sure. In some of those instances, it's either that or there are two things I think where that comes up. It's that, or you're so in the company and the editors really like you and they're like, hey, we want to throw you a few extra books, so this book's getting canceled. I think that might explain someone like Jim Moore, who's a little more well-positioned, I think, in Marvel than someone like Fred.
Like, you can handle the workload. It's only going to be 4 issues.
Yeah. So
this isn't going to derail your other series that you're doing.
Yeah, but yeah, I don't want to name names and point people out, but I can think of a few names off the top of my head of some people who have been there to help end runs. So. Yeah,
it's got to be a no-win situation, and you hope for the creator that maybe there's some type of back channel deals. Like, listen, we've got this other project that we know that's important. Let's finish this up, and then we'll get the real deal going. Because it's not quite ready yet. You hope that they're not just kind of being hung out to dry.
Yeah,
on something like that. I know obviously you're within the comic book industry. You have friends that were within the industry. Do you ever get the idea, or maybe other people within the industry, they come into a series thinking that this was designed to fail, even before it started? Maybe not specifically with the constraints that Kurt Busiek has, where you're. Mm-hmm. He said, it's the circumstances that, destined it to fail. Maybe we're just putting this out to put it out, but we don't expect any type of success with it.
Yeah, I mean, they always have more experimental books and stuff like that. They just toss out, see what's going to happen. I think that was a big part of the New 52, where a ton of those books, they're putting it out because they had to put out 52 books. So they looked through and they were like, oh, well, let's try All-Star Western. Let's try Dial H for Hero. Let's try Voodoo. Let's try, and just like going down the list of these like offshoot books. And I'm sure they figured 9 times out of 10 or more it was going to be a flop, but they had to do 52 books. And you never know which one's going to end up being a bigger hit. And I think for the New 52, that was probably Animal Man, which ended up being that, like, hit
Jeff Lemire, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that, that's part of it too, is if you're flooding the market with stuff like that, or you're trying to put out X amount of books, you know that most of them aren't going to, if you're putting out 52 books, or you're putting out anything close to that, not all of them are going to make it into the top 10, no matter what you do. It's impossible. So.
Absolutely. It's interesting when you have these kind of more flood the market strategies. There's a lot of risk being taken, but it's not like they're going to start promoting this more obscure character that hasn't been published in maybe 10 years, or a character that hasn't headlined his own series in 15 years, or maybe a brand new character at the expense of Batman, or at the expense of Superman, or if you're Marvel, at the expense of Spider-Man. And you really have an uphill climb, to make it and be successful. So when you finally do see some of these new characters kind of take off, it's almost, it's almost a miracle. Like everything has to be perfect. The writing has to be great. The art has to be dope. Everyone has to be talking about it to get the word of mouth out there to really drive the sales. Because there's just not a lot of, even like, I think Scott Snyder, he was one of the hottest writers at DC when they did the New Age of Heroes. He had his own book in there.
Yeah.
Wasn't very successful because there was just too much coming out at the same time.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah, it's got to be frustrating, but it's worth the risk because, hey, if you can get the character to pop, it's good for your reputation.
Yeah. And I do think it's important to put some of this into context in the sense that, some people might be wondering, like, well, what were they worried about with George being able to get Wonder Woman out on time? And it was because he was the one doing Crisis on Infinite Earths as they were leading up to the relaunch. So it was like, well, is he going to be able to finish Crisis, move into Wonder Woman, get enough Wonder Woman in the can so it can be putting this out monthly? So there were a lot of factors going on for that.
Yeah, so it's an interesting piece of history. I like when you kind of get a little snapshot of things that have happened in the past, kind of look at the comic book industry today. Like I said, we've kind of heard those claims. So just in your mind, are people being set up for failure, like on purpose, or are people just being set up with hard circumstances that it's going to be difficult to overcome?
Yeah, I don't think a lot of it's intentional, but I do think a lot of it. I do think you can still be set up for failure without it being intentional. I think, like exactly what Kurt was saying, I do think beyond Kurt that there are a lot of other people who were told, oh, you're going to do this project and we're not going to, they're not necessarily being told this straight up, but like, oh, we're not really going to promote this and we're going to deprioritize this because something better came along and we're going to push that. And I get the mindset of that because basically you go into something and like with a marketing team and they might be like, well, if we do this kind of marketing, we can increase sales by, like 10%. So do you want to increase 10% of 10,000 copies or 10% of 50,000 copies? So if you start setting up a project, you start realizing you're going to have to deprioritize it to put money elsewhere. You want to tell people you hired, it's not going to reflect poorly on them. But if that person, especially if they do more than one project like that, even with that understanding, the higher ups turn around or the others turn around and go like, oh, we can't hire this person, they're not selling comics.
That's a good point. That was kind of where I wanted my next question to go. So for indie comic writers, maybe they're established on the indie scene where they've got a couple of good titles that have done well, or maybe you're just getting in there. Is it smart to pick and choose your opportunities? I imagine you don't get a lot of Marvel and DC work just thrown at you all the time. Once you get a foot in the door, a lot of people I imagine just jump at it. But it might be more wise to pick and choose your battles for something that sounds like it might be the opportunity for you to really shine and get a character that people are going to gravitate to.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times that's it's a tough situation to be in because, like you said, you don't have a choice in that. So, the advice like some people might give would be like, don't go to DC or Marvel. Get successful on your own and have them come to you, because then you're going to be in a better position to leverage things if they're coming to you as opposed to you coming to them. So
Yeah, absolutely. You think about, you want to get that big break on your terms rather than on their terms. Otherwise, you might not be getting, this, one of the X-Men books. You might be getting, Dial H for Hero.
Sure.
Cool character, cool series. Not a lot of people know what it is.
Yes.
That's the problem. So it's kind of hard to break something like that out. So I don't know. I always hear when I hear the statement, like, they knew this would never sell to begin with. I think there is some truth to that. Mm-hmm. Maybe they didn't know specifically this will never sell, but I think, the publisher, the editor, the creators probably went in knowing this was going to be a really hard sell. If it's not executed perfectly, and even if it is executed perfectly, depending on the character, depending on the circumstances, you can't, you don't know what the climate of what's going on, out in the real world is going to happen that could affect your title. Even if it's perfect, it might still not be successful. With a lot of characters, it probably still won't be, unfortunately.
Sure. I think there's some examples of how to make that work, like with, what was it? Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. Perch just did that video analysis on that. And even though the book sold not too far into its run, under 10,000 copies as a floppy, it was a massive hit with Scholastic. So sometimes there's also that, but it doesn't always hit. There are a lot of books that then don't blow up in Scholastic, so or in other markets. So that's another reason why some of these books go that way.
So Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur, I'm glad you brought it up. It wasn't something I meant to talk about, but that's a really good example.
Yeah.
When I lived in the States, I would go to the comic shop, and every once in a while, I would see a parent come in with maybe a youngster, 7 or 8 years old, and he would go up to the counter, and he would have a pull list. And you could see he was really excited about it, and he would get a couple of comic books in there, normally the younger titles for the kids or whatever. You just don't see that a lot. So you have a Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur book. You come in as a creator, you know that you're writing a floppy. It's going to go into a market that's mostly geared towards older readers, I would say 25 and older, but the book itself and the materials are geared for maybe an audience of like 7 to 12 years old. So you don't want to all of a sudden change Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur to be a comic for a 30-year-old. You want to keep it for kids, but you want it to be accessible enough that maybe the 30-year-old doesn't mind reading it with their 10-year-old before they get it on the trade as a trade or something in Scholastic. Yeah. So it's fun things that I imagine creators have to consider. You do have to know your audience and stuff like that. But I do imagine a lot of people feel like they're in a no-win situation. But a paying gig is a paying gig, and an opportunity is an opportunity you didn't have yesterday. So I imagine a lot of people have to take them when they can get them.
Yeah, no, for sure. And then, it's also goes into the whole thing with we had to put this out because we had that agreement with the Marston estate. And that's what Kurt's saying was, a big driving force here is that you needed 4 Wonder Woman comics or comics starring Wonder Woman like in a calendar year, or the rights would revert.
Yeah, they didn't publish 4 issues of something with Wonder Woman as a lead feature with her name as the main logo or as a lead feature under some other logo. Every year the rights would revert. So there's certain conditions they had to meet. Marvel had something similar with Captain Marvel. Once they killed off Marvel, in order for them to keep the copyright for Captain Marvel instead of it reverting back and maybe DC claiming it. So you end up seeing like a kind of aimless where the title Captain Marvel is just bouncing on characters. Yeah. And it's just really, I don't know, it wasn't very steady. It was just like, what are they doing with this? Well, they're just keeping the copyright. They don't want it to go back. They don't want it to revert.
Yeah, so that's why, you had Monica Rambeau take on that title, but then, it would move from her to other characters. She'd take it back. I think this is also why, it's probably why Dwayne McDuffie ended up writing those couple of Captain Marvel, Monica Rambeau one-shots back in the early 90s. I think that's probably why they did that as well. So, and it makes sense why Carol Danvers, you move that over. If you have a bunch of people that have the mantle, you can keep swapping it and throw it wherever you need it to be. So if you kill off any of those characters, you can be like, oh, well, that's just going to move over here, and it's fine.
Also makes sense why Carol Danvers as Captain Marvel has been rebooted so many times in such a short amount of time. Now, the latest one's, I think it's over 30 issues. We're talking about a pretty decent run at this point.
Yeah.
They have to keep the character alive. Otherwise, they lose copyright to go back and, it's no longer Shazam. It's back to Captain Marvel. Yeah. So you've got to find something. I'm glad that they found some stability with the character under Kelly Thompson. They really needed that. So it explains why you see a lot of these things. You're like, that makes no sense whatsoever. A lot of times, maybe it doesn't have to do with the sales. It has to do with some other outside agreements so they can keep the rights to copyrights and stuff like that.
Yeah, and especially in this case with, a character like Wonder Woman with, with what Kurt was doing, it's like, well, we can spend this little bit of money to make the comic just in case, or else we will lose out on a multi-million-dollar franchise.
Do you want to risk it and not get your billion-dollar Wonder Woman movie that you probably thought could happen eventually?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, Joe, I do want to say thank you very much for your perspective. I imagine the viewers have their own perspective. Do you think certain comic creators have been set up for failure? Certain comics are released with the understanding that it was never intended to actually sell comics. Here we have a specific set of circumstances under Kurt Busiek that kind of got the conversation going. But I think it's an interesting thing to talk about, and I do appreciate you shedding some light on some of this.
Yeah, thanks for having me.